An author by the name of Daniel Taylor wrote a book called Letters to My Children. And in this book, he, as a father, he reflected back or some of the questions that his kids ask him through the years. And each chapter he's responding as now he can reflect on it a little more on some of the questions that his kids asked him. In one of the chapters, he said he reflected back on a time that his son asked him a question. He said, "Dad, a weird kid at school, a kid that's weird," we kind of know what that means, don't we, from a kid's perspective, "wants to be my friend. What should I do?" And so Taylor writes this letter to his son, and he tells him about the time that he was in the 5th grade. And he says his 5th grade teacher did something that he hopes 5th grade teachers no longer do. Because the last Friday of every month in his 5th grade class, every kid knew what that was. The last Friday of the month was Square Dance Day. Yeah. And what the teacher would do, she would have all the boys stand up. They would line along the side of the room at the blackboard. And then whichever boy was first in line had to look over the sea of girls that were all sitting there at their desks and would have to choose his, square dance date for the day. And, we always knew who would get chosen first or second. It was always, Debbie or Michelle or, some of the popular, pretty kind of girls. But kind of the question every last Friday of the month, the question that always kind of resonated through this 5th grade class: who will dance with Mary? Who's going to choose Mary? You see, Mary was heavy, not well groomed, came out of a very poor background, so her clothes were often dirty, not well kept. Her hair was often greasy, not well managed. And she had kind of a funny limp. Nobody even knew why, but when she walked, she just kind of had a funny limp. And so it was always every last Friday of the month, kind of the question in the 5th grade class: who will choose Mary? Who's going to get stuck with Mary? Who's going to dance with Mary? Well, he said one month, the last Friday of the month was approaching, and his dad pulled him to the side. And he said, "Dan, I know that it's last Friday of the month, it's Square Dance Day." He goes, "I'm going to ask you a favor." He says, "What's that?" He says, "I want you to choose Mary." And then he said those words that every 5th grade church-going kid hates to hear: "It's the Christian thing to do." So he said he fretted about it all day long. He fretted about it at school. What would his friends say? How could he, choose Mary? Everybody's going to make fun with him. Nobody wants to dance with Mary. She kind of smelled bad, and she acted funny, and she talked kind of weird, and everybody would make fun of him if he chose Mary. And then he kind of figured it out in his own 5th grade logic. He got it all figured out. If he could position himself to be the last boy in line, because Mary was always chosen last. If he could be the last boy in line, then by the time it got to him, then the only choice left would be Mary. He could choose Mary. He could go home, tell his dad he chose Mary. Everything's perfect. Well, he said he doesn't know exactly what happened. After he reflected on it, he thinks maybe the teacher was in cahoots with his dad. But when all the boys got lined up at the chalkboard, guess where he was? First in line. You bet. And the teacher says, "Daniel, who do you choose? Who do you choose?" Now we're just going to kind of let Daniel ponder that for a moment, because I want us to reflect. Let's say you go into a doctor's office and you sit down with your physician and you tell your physician everything that's going on, and your physician looks up from the chart, or now looks away from the computer screen. And after you're done telling your physician everything that's going on, the physician says, "I don't care." Or let's say your child is choking. You try the Heimlich maneuver. You don't know what to do. You call 911, and the person on the other end, the responder in 911, you go, my child's choking, and the 911 responder says, "I don't care." Or you look out your window and you see your neighbor's 5-year-old is playing in the street. You call the mother, you shout out to the mother, your 5-year-old, and the mother responds, I don't care. Why should I care? It's not very plausible, is it? Not very realistic. Seems absurd. Well, let's pretend that I'm new to the area. Just moved in to Atlanta, surrounding community. And I walk in these doors here, and I come in, and I, maybe meet a person or two. Maybe I sit down, right here. Don't know anybody. Never been to this church before. 100 years old? Really, Warren? And when I get up, and when I leave that door, and I hop in my car, will I hear kind of in the back of my spirit a church that basically says, we don't care. We don't care. I hope not. I pray not. That anybody who comes into these doors will experience a Christ-like community of care, of love, support. Do you know why most people leave a church? Why most people leave a church? Not because of bad preaching, believe it or not. It's good, maybe. Not because of the music or the teaching or the finances or the nursery. Most people leave a church because they felt like the church just didn't care. The church doesn't care. Perhaps the greatest indictment on any church or any Christian are the words, they just don't care. Now, through the years, I've done a lot of consulting with churches where I'm able to sit down with churches, talk to church leaders and things like that. And we start doing just a real basic, what's called a SWOT analysis, start talking about your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. And whenever I talk about strengths, and this is without exception, every church I've ever met with and talked to the leaders and talk about their strengths, guess what every church believes one of their strengths is? We are a friendly church. We're a friendly church. Every church in America believes that we are a friendly church. And what does that mean? That means if you're on the inside, if you're part of the team, you have a friendly experience. Hi, how are you? Hi, good morning. Hey, good to see you. Like that. But if you're a Mary, if you're an outsider, you really don't need a friendly church. What you need is friends. And there's a difference between being a friendly church and having friends in the church. And so that's what we're going to focus on here today. How can we cultivate not just a friendly church? I think we're a friendly church. Every church thinks they're a friendly church. How can we cultivate a church of care, a church of love, a church of friends, a church that goes out of its way to pick Mary, to embrace those that are a little different, to embrace those who feel like they're broken, those who are hurting, those who feel like they're left out, those who feel like they're no longer in the game. I'm going to cherry pick just a few passages out of Peter. This is not our main text, but just a few passages out of Peter just to kind of prime the pump here. 1 Peter 1:22, Peter says, "Now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have, by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for your brothers, love one another deeply from the heart." He says that the response to obeying the truth is a deep love that we share here within the body. 1 Peter, chapter 2, just a chapter later, verse 17, "Show proper respect to everyone, love the brotherhood of believers, fear God, honor the king." Chapter 3, verse 8, finally, he says, "All of you, live in harmony with one another, be sympathetic, love as brothers and sisters, be compassionate and humble with each other." Do you envision a church like that? Do you see a church like that? A church that embraces, a church that loves, a church that aggressively seeks people that are new, people that are from the outside, people who have no church home, people who need to be chosen, to be included, to be accepted, to be welcomed. Well, how do we do that? How do we as a church, how do we make that happen? Well, the text I'd like to look at today goes all the way back to the time just prior to the giving of the Ten Commandments. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be looking at the book of Exodus. You remember the Ten Commandments where God calls Moses. We have the scene at the burning bush. He says, go to Pharaoh, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Then we have these epic plagues of basically God showing Pharaoh who's in charge. Pharaoh asks the question, so who is this God of yours that I should release all my slaves out into the wilderness to worship him? Now, I know school teachers say there's no such thing as a stupid question. But to ask Jehovah God, to ask Moses, who is this God of yours? And so God sends some audio-visual lessons. Right? Each plague is a direct attack on the Egyptian pantheon. Each plague is a direct attack on one of the gods of Egypt. And finally, we finally get to the plague of the Passover. Finally, Pharaoh is defeated. He's fatigued. And he allows Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. Well, they cross the Red Sea. You're familiar with that, where it looks like there's no way out. God provides a way where they cross the Red Sea. It swallows up the Egyptian army. And you think, well, everything should be great for Moses, shouldn't it? What a great leader. He's led the people out of Egypt. He's led them through the Red Sea. They depended on God. God washed up the Egyptian army. What could be wrong? Well, guess what? It doesn't take long for God's people to start complaining. Can you believe that? Sometimes God's people complain. I can't believe that. Exodus chapter 15, real quick, look at verse 22. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? Move on over chapter 16, verse 2. In the desert, the whole community, we're talking at least 1 million, maybe more. The whole community grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. Look at chapter 17, verse 3. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? They're saying, we'd rather go back into captivity than to be out here with you. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lift up from this episode in the life of the nation of Israel, I want to lift up 3 problems. 3 problems that they were having. And guess what? A lot of churches have these same 3 problems. And then after we look at the 3 problems very quickly, we're going to see 3 solutions. And I think those 3 solutions will apply for us as well. So problem number one, dissatisfaction was rising. Dissatisfaction among the people was rising. They were complaining. They were upset. Their needs weren't being met. They were thirsty. Saying, we're not meeting all of our needs, Moses. We are thirsty. You don't hear us. We'd rather go back into bondage than to be here with you. You see, whenever a people's needs are not being met, dissatisfaction with the leadership begins to rise. This explains every revolutionary or civil war. Our needs aren't being met, our needs aren't being heard, we're not being represented, and that we're going to lash out at the leadership. That happens in nations, it happens in churches. You see, for many congregations, providing care can be reactionary. We just kind of stand back and we just kind of wait till there's a problem, and then when we see the fire, then we try to get somebody there to respond to the need. But I'm convinced what most of us need is not just reactionary care, but is proactive care, preventive care. Not just trying to respond, not just trying to react. But we have those friendships, we have those relationships in place. Dissatisfaction, it was rising among God's people, it can rise among a church. We say, like, the church leaders just aren't responding to my needs. I don't have anybody that really understands what I'm going through. Dissatisfaction can rise when needs aren't being met. Now look to chapter 18, look at verses 13 and 14. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. And they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all this that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing?" He says, "Why do you all alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" See, Moses receives what all men dread, advice from his father-in-law. His father-in-law looks at this and he says, "This is not sustainable. There's too many needs here. You can't meet all the needs." Moses. So dissatisfaction was rising. Well, let me just kind of interject here. This happens in a church. When everybody in the church kind of expects that my needs will only be met by certain people. My needs can only be met by a paid staff person or by the elders, those that are kind of commissioned as leaders. And certainly the leaders need to be meeting needs, but the job's too big. That's the point, Jethro's point. This job is too big for just a handful of people to try to meet all the needs. He says it can't be done. And so that surfaces problem number 2. There was an unhealthy dependence upon one person. Unhealthy dependence upon Moses. You see, American churches as a whole, typically speaking, have an unhealthy dependence upon either one person or a very small group of people. We expect, the paid staff of the church or the elders of the church, those are the ones who are supposed to provide care. Those are the ones who can meet the need. If the needs are going to be met, then it has to be the preacher, or it has to be the youth minister, or it has to be the elders. They provide all the care. I know a long, long time ago, when I was serving with the church, a fellow in the church, he was extremely upset. And we couldn't figure out why. And then, when we finally got him to kind of share what was going on, he was really upset because he was in the hospital. Believe it or not, he was in the hospital for less than a day, which is often the insurance company more than the doctor making that decision. He was in the hospital for less than a day, and I wasn't there as a preacher. I wasn't able to get there. I don't remember why. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't even know about it. I'm not even sure why. But what was interesting is one of the elders had been there, and the Sunday school class teacher was there, and somebody else from the church had visited. In that very short day that he was there, he actually had 3 or 4 people from the church that had come by. But none of that counted because the preacher wasn't there. And the funny thing, or ironic thing, is I'm really not that good at hospital calling. I love doing it. I'm happy to do it. I'm just not very good at it. I step on the oxygen hose, kick over the bedpan. It's just not my sweet spot. Some people are really, really good at that. You don't have to be paid. You don't have to have a title at the church to love someone at the hospital, to show care, provide care, to have the mercy gift. And so what we need to do is recover a biblical understanding of ministry, that it's not one person that ministers to many, but according to the New Testament is about every person ministering to each other, that we're supposed to serve each other. We're supposed to minister to each other and take care of each other's needs. The job's too big for just a handful of people to take care of everybody's needs. That's the point. So problem number 1, dissatisfaction was rising because needs weren't being met. Problem number 2 is there's this unhealthy dependence upon just one person or a small group of people. And then problem number 3, it kind of leads to problem number 3. Look again, verse 15. Second half of verse 15, all of verse 15. Moses answered him. Okay, here's the response. Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good." Don't beat around the bush here, okay? Just say it. It's like, this is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you, and you cannot handle it alone. And so that's problem number 3, is burnout. Just burnout. Moses was trying. They were trying. One study that I read said the most dangerous group of people to insure for life insurance, number 1 is professional skydivers. Number 2 was professional ministers. Why? Because something's happened in the American church that we've put this undue pressure that this is the only person that can provide care. And if the preacher doesn't provide care, then I haven't been cared for. That's not New Testament at all. And so what we need to do is recover a New Testament understanding, New Testament appreciation that we are all caregivers and that we're called to care for each other. So how do we do that? How do we make that happen systematically, programmatically? How can we ensure that we're caring for each other's needs? So the three problems: dissatisfaction was rising, there's an unhealthy dependence on one person, which led to burnout. Well, let's look at three solutions then. Three solutions. The first comes there from verse 19. We continue on in the text where we were. This is again as Jethro talking to Moses. He says, "Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to Him. Teach them the decrees and the laws and show them the way to live and the duties that they are to perform." Notice, Jethro says, you need to teach them God's law. As a matter of fact, this is reflected in the New Testament. It talks about the role of the elders. A fundamental role of the elder is to ensure that the church is grounded in truth, ensure that the church is teaching what is true, to make sure that the church is on the right path. He's saying that's your job, is to teach them the decrees and laws. Verse 21, "But select capable people from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens." And notice the smallest unit there. He starts with thousands. Some people are capable of kind of managing thousands, but then he goes down into hundreds and to fifties, and then even the smallest unit is a group of 10, that some people are especially gifted to kind of manage the needs, care for the needs within the smallest group of 10. And so solution number one is to select capable leaders. He tells Moses, you need to select some people who can help carry the load. It's called decentralizing care. All the care doesn't have to flow through one person. All the care doesn't have to flow through one group, small group. Decentralize that care. Care doesn't have to, and it can't, just all come from one small group of people. I've already shared here last Sunday, I shared we have a group who have committed to serving as small group leaders. And they met at my house last Sunday night. We're coming back this Sunday night, tonight. And then next week, I'll introduce them to you. I'll have them come up here and have the microphone, share a little bit about the group that they sense that God is envisioning for them to lead. And what I'm envisioning, we'll talk about it tonight, but I'm envisioning maybe some card tables in back, and each group will have, a card table. It says a little bit about their group and when they meet and where they meet, and if they already got some people in their group, and just kind of what their group's about. And it gives all of us a chance to just kind of meet the group leaders and find a group that you think might be a nice place where you can connect. You see, God gifts many, many people to meet needs. Not just a small group, not just a handful of leaders. But God gifts throughout His family. People have the giftedness to meet each other's needs. Now, look at the second half, verse 21. He says, down into thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, and verse 22, he says, "Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves, and that will make your load lighter because they will share it with you." And so solution number one is let's find some capable people. Number two is then empower them to serve. Empower them to do the work. Release them to actually provide ministry within the church. You see, for this whole thing to work, our small group leaders must be empowered to serve, must be empowered to arrange care within their group, because even within a group of 10, I don't expect the small group leader to provide all the care for that group of 10. They just arrange the care. They provide an atmosphere, a community where people can begin to care for each other. That's the goal. That's the picture. And so it means that the elders here at Atlanta Christian Church are releasing people within groups to take care of each other. Encouraging that, empowering that, enabling that. I heard a long time ago, a pastor talk about small group. This is at a huge church. And a pastor talked about the small group ministry that was going on. They had hundreds of small groups within this very large church. And he said they had almost, an unthinkable thing happen within their church. One of their members got murdered. Just terrible, just a terrible thing. And so he got word about it, and that first morning, he went over to the house of the family. And he said the most amazing thing happened when he got to the house. He knocked on the door, and there was still some police cars there and some officials things there. He knocked on the door, and guess who opened the door? It wasn't the spouse or the family of the person who had died, but it was one of the members of their small group. Opened the door and let him in the house. And he walked in the house, and there was another member of their small group that was there and was just kind of welcoming people as they came and kind of monitoring the living room and the commotion and things like that. And then as he stayed there a little longer, there was another, actually the leader of the small group actually was back there with the spouse, holding her hand and kind of grieving with her and answering questions, with the police. And then he realized that another member of the small group was actually down in the basement with the children of this family and just kind of trying to keep them occupied and loving on them and making sure somebody kept an eye on them. You see, and he reflected on this later, that's what a small group is. A small group is that community of care. It's not like a small group gets together and says, okay, now if one of us gets murdered, you're in charge of the front door, and you're in charge of the kids, and you're in charge of That's how the church thinks. Programmatically, we like to think like, okay, who's in charge of what, and let's have it all. But a small group is a functioning body of believers caring for each other. And when this tragedy happened, what did the small group do? They just responded. They showed up. They met the needs. They delivered the care. Solution number 1 is choose capable people, down to the smallest group of 10. Number 2 is empower them to serve. Release them to coordinate care within their small group of 10. And then solution number 3, look at the second half of verse 22 again. He says, that will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. That's the third solution. Solution number 3 is to share the load. Is then as small groups are caring for each other's needs, then we start to share the load. It's not up to one person or one small group of elders. It's not up to just a few leaders to try to minister to the needs within the church, but we are caring for each other. As small group members care for each other, they build those friendships. The relationships go deep. You see, once our small group ministry can get up and going and is healthy, I believe that there will be testimony after testimony after testimony of needs being met, lives being changed, and it had nothing to do with a paid staff person or an elder showing up at their door for a half hour. It had nothing to do with, some kind of program that was in place or some kind of, okay, this is your assignment. All that stuff is fine. But the life change that will happen is because those friendships get formed and people are doing life together. What's the result? Look at verse 23. Verse 23, he says, this is Jethro still, he says, if you do this, and God so commands, obviously we want to yield the whole thing to God's leading, he says, you will be able to stand the strain, and all the people will go home satisfied. What's satisfied mean? It means the needs are met. It means I felt cared for. It means I felt loved. It means I was heard. It means not that somebody had all of the answers, but someone was willing to listen to my questions. That's what it means. The people were satisfied. The King James reads it like this, and everyone will live in peace. Why? Because the needs are met. Because we're taking care of each other. If you're new here to this church, I want to encourage you especially to pray about joining a small group. I think everybody needs to be in one, but especially if you're new to the church and you just don't feel real connected, it's kind of hard to connect. On Sunday morning, a lot going on. I'm going to especially encourage you if you're new. Next week, come here next week, hear what the leaders say about their groups, and try to get each one, especially of our new people, into a group. My vision for this congregation is that we can grow, and we got lots of empty seats here. We can fill up some of these empty seats. And as we do that, as we grow, that everyone will have some small group to call home. Maybe it's one of the small groups that we're launching right now. Maybe it's a Bible study, or it's a committee, or a service team, or a group that meets over at the coffee shop once a week. But everybody in this church will have a group, a small group of believers that they can pour their heart, and they can hear and be heard, and love and be loved. A place to know and be known, serve and be served. A place called home. So the teacher is like, okay, Danny, who do you choose? Who will you dance with, Danny? And Taylor writes in his book, he said, I heard my own voice say, I choose Mary. And there was kind of shock among the group. And Mary kind of pushed her hair back and looked up. And he said he saw a little beam come to her face. And he said he walked over and he took her arm. And off they went to the dance. And he said, I don't remember very much about 5th grade. I don't remember the lessons. I don't remember most of my friends. But I will never forget the day I danced with Mary. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for allowing us to be a family beyond our extended family, a church family, a family of believers. Father, help us to build a community here that seeks those who are broken, those who are hurting, those who need a place to be heard, to be loved, to be cared for. Help us to be a body of believers who dances with the Marys of this world. Those that are hurting, those that are lonely, those that are scared, those that are different. Help us to become that type of body, caring for each other, loving for each other. In your name we pray. Amen.